What's going on, guys? Coach Gaglione here. This is another edition of the Powerlifting with the People podcast. I'm your host, Coach Gaglione. We got an interview today with John Rivas. How you doing?
Doing well, man. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
So I don't want to speak too much, but so we kind of have a little bit of a history and a past in powerlifting. And so oddly enough, when I first started coaching Larry Williams, it's probably like over 10 years ago at this point, but around like 2015 era, that 2015, 2016, 2017, when Larry was kind of coming up. The first kind of record was John's record in the 242s. And that guy kind of got broken a few times. Larry broke it first, then Andrew Herbert, and then Larry broke it again. And yeah, kind of like the rest is history. So never got a chance to meet John in person until this past weekend. Had a meet at Southside Barbell. So very cool. It's great to finally meet you in person. And but for those that don't know you, if you want to give a little more background info about who you are and what you got going on right now.
It was great meeting you, man. Yeah, so a little background from Virginia. Started lifting seriously in high school. Stopped playing football because of it, and I was just like, man, you mean I can get out what I put in? I don't have to worry about some coach playing, best buds with someone on the team. So I was like, all right, cool. So I went into that, and then I went to college. Took care of my grandpa for a year when I was at community college, and then I transferred to a military college. Um, and so that is where I met a guy named Monty Sparkman, who was a multiply lifter. I think he did some raw, and he does raw now, but he got me involved in powerlifting. And so powerlifting at that time, late 2000, before like the 2010s and all that, everything was, it was in USAPL, it was all gear. It was all single ply, and IPF Worlds was single ply, always has been. And so that was what we did. And, we went through that. So I started my freshman. I was the only freshman, because we go through hazing in the military stuff. And so you can't eat as much and whatever, but I was the only freshman to ever qualify for collegiate nationals, at least up until my point. But no, actually, that's true. So during the hazing part, I was the only one to ever qualify for collegiate nationals at my first meet. And so we went to collegiate nationals that year, and I was like 19. And I remember I was in the 181 class. So I'm 5'10, 5'11. And so I remember they called us to weigh in, and we all stood up, and I was like a foot taller than everybody. And I was like, oh, I get it. Like, I see what's going on.
Yeah.
And so we went back to work. And so I had 4 years at that college before I graduated. And my squat went from 430 my freshman year to low eights by the time I was a senior. So within like a 3-year span. And in that time period, I had made the IPF Team USA, went over to Poland in 2012, the World Championships, and got a squat medal there. And then after college, went down to Atlanta, was working for a guy named Sherman Ledford, who was a big powerlifter sponsor. And, he had Team Quest. If you ever saw the guys in the green shirts, Wade Hooper, Mike T, Brian Siders, all those guys. Eddie would come by and help coach us and stuff like that. And so that was a big thing to join their team and do that. And so I worked with him for a little bit. I met Steve Goggins down there. Steve sort of helped me. I was going through some injuries. He helped me sort of write my path and was like, hey, man, like, you can do this. Like, you can do it at the next level. And so moved back to Virginia and started going down. I said, hey, you know what? Let me just do some raw, because at that point it was transitioning to raw. This is like 2013, 14. So I did one raw meet, and I broke like a bunch of USAPL national records. And I trained like 8 weeks for it because we didn't lift raw back then. And so I trained 8 weeks, broke a bunch of records, was like the favorite to win nationals. I ended up getting like second or third at nationals that year as a junior lifter. And it was like the open. So I was like, okay. So I had to make a choice. It was either continue and try to win USAPL nationals the next year, or go into the big boys, right? And I was never one to be like, oh, let me try to, some guys have, like, let me try to see how far I can push supplements while I'm natty. I mean, I was never one to do that. So I was like, look, if I go that route, I'm just diving head first in. So I signed up for Raw Unity, and that was like 2015, maybe 2014, 2015. And Larry was there, a bunch of guys were there. Um, oh my gosh, there was some guys like really starting out. Kevin was there, Kevin Oak was there, and Dan. And so there was a lot of guys just like killing it at that time. Like that was a huge time for powerlifting. Records starting to be broken. And then so it's like, all right, cool, let's do this. And then within a year and a half of that, of starting taking PEDs and stuff, I had broken Dan's record, the 242 record with just sleeves. And after, I think I had the record for like maybe like 2 or 3 months. And then like Larry came and took it. And then, like I said, Andrew came in and messed with it and stuff. And I think Larry just set it so high that I was like, okay. I took about 6, 7 months and I was like, all right, I'm going to take this record back. I was like set to do it. And then I went to the next meet and I ended up in the warm-up room. I ended up doing my last warm-up squat with like 711 or something like that. And I remember I went down, went up, and my hamstring just went zzz, and I was like, oh my, you got to be kidding me. Like I just put all this time in, and I was like, I just trained, coming off the world record was my last meet. And I was like, dude, like freaking powerlifting watch was like Rivas king of the 242s and all this stuff. So I felt like I had a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And, never being that popular in social media, I was like, this is my opportunity to break out and this and that. Well, obviously I strained my hamstring. Like I felt it zip, couldn't even deadlift. I think I just benched that meet. And then a couple weeks later, I was like bumming on myself. And I was like, man, what do I do? Like I feel beat up. Like this is, the record's getting to the point where it's like, it's hard for anyone to beat, and even hard for Larry to possibly recreate that day. And so I'm like, it's up there now. And so I was like, all right, what do we want to do? Well, the Jay Cutler bodybuilding show was in town in Richmond. I was like 10 weeks out. I called up my buddy and I was like, hey man, I think I may do it. And he was like being supportive. He's like, cool. But, he knows, dude, we're going to have to work. And, didn't have arms, didn't really have like shoulders and stuff back then because you're a bodybuilder. You're a powerlifter. You don't focus on that. But ended up doing that show with like 8 weeks of prep, ended up winning. And then I was like, okay, cool. Let me stick with this. And that's sort of where things have been ever since then, competing at a pretty high level. And, I've won the Arnold Amateur. And it's hard to explain it to people, but like, it's very difficult to get a pro card in open bodybuilding. A lot of the other classes, like the board shorts ones, and then some of the female classes are, to be fair, it's a lot easier. It's a lot. They get tons more chances to get a pro card. But when you get to the open guys, and Larry knows this too, it's not easy. And so that's, sort of what we've been doing. But other than that, just been having fun, man. Still trying to keep training somewhat. I can never get away of powerlifting completely. But, so I'll sneak in heavy compound movements and stuff. But
Yeah, that was like one thing I was kind of curious because I've seen you were in the Japan and share. I know you've been some of this stuff on some of your training is on their YouTube channel, which has been cool. So I've been kind of and then that was kind of like where I was kind of like when I signed up for this strict curl competition, and I was
mm-hmm.
like, and then it was just kind of like a blast from the past. And like I said, I wasn't, it was just really kind of interesting. And then I see that like some of your workouts, like, you're maybe squatting with chains or, you're kind
Mm-hmm.
of still throwing some of that stuff in. So
Mm-hmm.
do you say, I'm just kind of curious, like how you incorporate that? Is it kind of strategic? Is some of it like just kind of like you said, to scratch that itch of like, because you still, 'cause
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, because I did a bodybuilding show and I'm happy I did it, but I also kind of knew that like that as my main thing, like wasn't, it just wasn't like something I was going to do long term, but I'm like happy I did it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, we all like have like we want to kind of I think on some level we want to look good, we want to look muscular, we want to look strong, but I think we also want to be able to like have the show and the go, right? I think on some level
Yeah.
we'll be able to. So how do you kind of balance some of like the heavier compound movements without obviously, like you said, there is we were talking a little bit off air and then in person, like there is some risk, right, with some of that stuff. You have to
Yeah.
be more
Yeah.
careful. So how do you kind of like navigate those heavy lifts?
Man, that's a good one because I would say it took me about a year from the powerlifting to bodybuilding. After I did my first show, it took about a year before I was in the gym and I was like, oh, I get it. I get how to train for bodybuilding because powerlifting, it's A to B, trying to find the shortest leverage, the best range of motion to move a weight from this point to this point. And whether it's widening your legs or arching your back or what have you, it's finding the best range of motion, shortest pathway. And so with bodybuilding, it was like throw that away. Now we want to control it as long, like as deep as we can, as much stretch as we can, as much contraction. So it's like you go from trying to shorten everything to trying to lengthen everything, and studies have been shown, especially with hamstring work, like the majority of growth happens in the lengthened motion portion of the movement. And so it took me a while to learn. It took me about a year. And I remember I was in the gym one time and I was like, oh, I felt it. I got it. And then so after that, I started growing really fast because I sort of figured out, oh, this is how you do it. And I stopped worrying about weight and started doing more, which we don't necessarily want to do in a strength sport, but started just muscling things up. And so, I would say my strength now, like CNS wise and form wise, isn't what it used to be, but I will say I'm much bigger and much stronger now than what I was back then. So if I had to go back, who knows what I would do? I don't know. I might suck. I don't know. But to scratch the itch, sometimes there is, right? And so what I do is I've been at this long enough with bodybuilding that I've been able to run a few different types of cycles. And I'm not talking drug cycles, I'm talking training cycles and things where almost a year long, to where I would go to a gym and this gym would have the best. I mean, it would have every piece of machinery, plate loaded, pin loaded, Nautilus, Panada, Arsenal, and like every piece of equipment that you're like, okay, they're not missing a thing, right? And I focused on that for a year, but then I let go of the squatting, I let go of the deadlifts, and then I went on stage, right? Because that's the only way we can really see with this experiment how it's going to look. Well, I looked and I was missing some density in my lower back. I have a really good Christmas tree, so I was missing that. And then there were certain parts of my body just didn't look dense anymore. And I was like, man, what? Like I trained so hard on those machines, failure, force reps, negatives, pauses, squeezes, contractions, but it just didn't look the same. So I was like, okay, well, I had a few talks with like my buddies and my coach, Justin Harris. And he was like, dude, what made you like, what comes easy for you? Like, what does your body want to do? I'm like, I want to move weight. He's like, well, we have to incorporate that. So found a good gym and started doing a lot more stiff legged work, compound movement, so I'm not trying to pull 800 instead of trying to do 800 for 5. I'll do 500 for 10 stiff leg, same amount of strain, but I'm getting more muscle activation.
Yep.
And so I'll do things like that. And I'll do things where instead of just throwing knee wraps on and hitting 700 for 8 reps on squat, I'll do like I showed you the other day. Like, so I'll do like, everything beltless, and I'll do a chain squat. So I add chain. So obviously it's not as heavy, but as you come up, it's heavier. It's not as much on your knees and things like that. And so I can incorporate those movements at the beginning of my workout when I'm strongest. And so I still get that activation, right? Because we have like, what is it? Sarcoplasmic and myofibrillar activation of the muscle. And so I do want to hit those strength movements to really build that density. And that's worked really well. And I wish I could go back and tell myself, train this way. This is going to be the best. But it takes time to figure out. So,
I think it's really interesting. I think that there's some people like I kind of pay attention to a lot of different strength sports, not just powerlifting. Like I said, I've been kind of getting into strict curl now. I'm a fan of weightlifting. I'm a fan of strongman. I kind of like pay attention to all these different things and kind of like what you were saying about what's really in vogue in the fitness industry now and like in bodybuilding especially is working the stretch position of the muscle. The stretch position, that's kind of like the big kind of buzzword. And then I think the other thing is that people are always they're looking for like the most optimal, whatever that means, optimal training
yeah,
techniques
optimal or,
where and they're
yeah,
having some weird cable setup or whatever. And I think
science based.
science-based, evidence-based is kind of a big thing. And I think there's definitely something to be said about just keeping things real simple and progressively overloading and just kind of, having some heavy movements in the rotation. I noticed with myself too, like I said, I've only done one show and like I said, I didn't take bodybuilding to the level that you're taking it for sure. But I noticed like all my back poses, especially compared to a lot of the other amateurs, like my back, my legs were like way more developed than the other amateurs, I think, from all like the heavy squatting and deadlifting,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, what was weak? A lot of my arms, my shoulders. So those are typically things that, powerlifters are probably not doing a lot of curls and side raises, right? And
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So I think that sometimes success leaves clues. I think sometimes I know like in like the earlier, I don't know if you followed a lot of like some of the earlier, bodybuilders, but I think
Oh,
a lot
100%.
more, there was a lot more crossover with like kind of doing
Mm-hmm.
some strength work as well. And I think that's kind of, not everyone, like someone like yourself comes to mind, but not everyone is doing a lot of heavy deadlifts, or some people might not even barbell squat or even they might just, stick to mostly machines. And there might be a period of time where that's, maybe that's because you're trying to be more cautious. But I do think there's something to be said about, having the strength and the horsepower behind. So I think that's just kind of interesting. And I wanted to kind of like hear your take on it. And I also think being kind of a guy that like was very inspired with like West Side Barbell, I think the other thing too is I think going back to what you were saying about, working the stretch position of the muscle, a lot of people have kind of completely abandoned things like bands and chains because they feel like they have
Mm-hmm.
to like overload like the bottom. But to
Mm-hmm.
your point, like if your joints are cranky or if you have bad knees
Mm-hmm.
or lower back issues, the chains could be a great tool to still get that like overloading stimulus, but still like kind of make it a little bit easier, like where you're most vulnerable to, where
Yeah.
sometimes you have to kind of like pick and choose where sure, like you want things to be hard to an extent, but sometimes to smooth out the strength curve and make it a more even
Yeah.
challenge. So I don't know if there's any other movements that you like to maybe like kind of play with the strength curve or use accommodating resistance or any other
Yeah.
kind of like exercises that you like, using
Yeah. And you know
stuff.
what? And I've spoken. Justin also coaches Brandon Curry, who's won a Mr. Olympia. And so, luckily I'm able to communicate with him and pick his brain and whatnot. And the funny thing is, and you notice this with bodybuilders is, and Kai said this before, he's like, I'm not a weightlifter, I'm a bodybuilder. Well, the thing is, sometimes it doesn't, honestly, with powerlifting, we're so ingrained, or strength sports, we're so ingrained of, did he pause the bench? Did he do this? Did he full range? None of that matters in growing tissue.
Sure.
None of it matters. And so if you find a way, okay, I need a little more outer head sweep on my quadricep. A good example Brandon uses is he brings his feet like literally next to each other, toes in, and does like quarters on the hack squat. And if you've seen his legs recently at the Arnold where he got top 4, dude could have beaten Andrew Jack. Like his legs looked amazing. And so it's one of those things where you just have to get out of your mind. And I think social media does a tough job because a lot of people will see an exercise like, well, that's stupid, or, he's not that strong. It's like, who cares? Who cares? Like, find what works, and whether it's cutting range of motion, whether it's using the chains, right? So I want to train heavy, right? Like I said, so instead of just doing, okay, add 5 plates this week, add 6 plates, and then my knees start getting sore over time or something like that because I'm not 18 anymore, then I'll just throw chains on there. Deloads in the bottom. But as we come up, by the time you're standing up, it's added 150 pounds or whatever. And so, that way you're still getting tissue activation. And so I think that doing things like limiting ranges of motion on deadlifts, like and like we've always trained and doing like a rack pull or things like that, and all those types of movements are great. It's just figuring out what's going to work best for you. Some guys have longer arms, you guys have shorter arms.
Yeah.
So if you're a shorter bodybuilder and you're trying to grow, you may not want to always pull from the ground, right? That may cause like just wearing down of your CNS just in general, because you got to move it so much further, right? And if you have long arms, well, maybe you're not getting as much work through the hamstrings, because by the time you put the bar down, your upper body has only come down this far, right? Now, if you had shorter arms, your upper body would come down all the way. So once again, it's just figuring out what works best for you. And I would say the best mindset to have to go from a strength sport to like something like body, like a muscle building, or just trying to really grow the muscle, would be to forget about everything you learned like rule wise with lifting, like, hey, it has to be this length, otherwise it doesn't count. You're not doing the movement right. There's honestly just no rules for building muscle. It's just figuring out what works best for you.
Yeah, I think even for powerlifters, I think sometimes people get really bent out of shape with just training lifts. It's like if it's a training lift, it's like, now again, there are better ways to train for a contest, of course, and it's good to like, try to keep your competition lifts to a contest
Mm-hmm.
standard for practice sake. But like,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm not sure if you ever had a chance to watch Ray Williams squat in person. I mean, one of
Yeah,
the
yeah. Ray's actually, so the funny news, Ray's actually maybe an hour and a half from me right now. He co-owns a gym, I believe, outside of Richmond. So Richmond's the main city in Virginia. I'm over at the beach, so I'm like an hour and a half, 2 hours away. But his gym, I can't remember the name, Iron something. But yeah,
Iron
he's over there,
Shoulder,
so I'll
Iron
get to see him
Shoulder,
squat
maybe.
sometimes. And yeah,
So, anyways, yeah, I've known Ray for a long time. Ray squatted 1052 at our gym in Farmingdale, New York.
mm,
Uh, that was one of the craziest things I've ever seen
yeah,
in person. But anyway, so like recently, they just had their Powerlifting America Nationals, and he's kind of getting back in the swing of things. And
yeah,
anyway, one of his training lifts, there was a couple of people that are like, oh, this is high or whatever, and he's
of
like squatting
course,
like he's squatting like I don't know north of 900 pounds with like no spotter, and it's like, and
yeah. Just
it's
walk
like
out.
part of it is like like making sure like you don't like decapitate yourself, and it's a training lift, and obviously we both know from experience like when you have that kind of weight on your back, it's like keeping the position is going to be more important than trying to sink it an extra inch or whatever, just
Yeah,
from a
yeah,
safety standpoint and all that stuff. It's like, and then, anyway, so would it be better to like, hit a convincing depth for sure, but at the expense of, blowing a disc out or just, make
yeah,
whatever it is. And, I'm sure, I don't know, we haven't talked about this too much, but I'm sure like, um, you see it with a lot of these IPF lifters since, I think that the first, Raw Worlds was like in 2012, and a lot of the super heavyweights
yes,
they,
yeah,
they have what I've kind of a much shorter lifespan, and you see a lot more of these guys getting hip replacements and knee replacements,
yeah.
and because now we're not those guys aren't protected with the suit, and their athletes
No,
are really low. But anyways, but yeah, to your point, I think that like even from a powerlifting standpoint, um, just understanding that there's training
yeah,
and there's sport practice. So like if you're doing like a rack pull or a partial deadlift or a floor press or whatever, or if you, as long as you have like a reason for doing what you're doing, and
hmm,
especially when it comes to bodybuilding, I think that's kind of cool if you're able to stimulate your muscle. And I think also too, as I know you're like a bigger guy, I'm a bigger guy. We're built, everyone's built differently, especially when it comes to machines. Sometimes the machine may not like fit you throughout a certain range,
yeah,
and that's
yeah,
another thing where you have to kind of make sure that like, maybe the machine only works through like a three quarters, of a range of, and then any more, maybe it's kind of
yeah,
shearing your elbow or whatever. Uh, a lot of times these machines are kind of built for like the average size person and they're not like made for like a super heavyweight open bodybuilder or someone that's maybe really tall or really short. So I,
mm-mm.
I think those are all good things. So one thing I wanted to kind of circle back to, um, so we spent a lot of time talking about your bodybuilding, which has been awesome. I know you have a lot of, and one of the things I just wanted to kind of throw out there while we're on the air too. I really thought that was really cool that you were your all-time record holding power lifter, helping some buddies out at the gym. And not to
Hmm.
say like, I know that that's not why you're doing it, whatever, but I think it was just cool to see that you were humble enough. You wanted to help your training partners and teammates out. And so I think that was really nice to see because you don't always get to see that. I know that you kind of come from some of that equipped lifting background. I think is nice because you probably were used to training in more of an environment with maybe people helping you and stuff like that. And you don't always see that like anymore. So I thought that was really cool. How is like the environment that like you're training at now? So that was like, and then I have another kind of follow-up question to do with powerlifting, but like, what's your training environment? Like, what was some of the differences and like what you preferred for like your powerlifting training environment towards your bodybuilding in terms of like having training partners, having help? Like, what are some of the similarities and differences?
Oh man, like dude, if you look at like, well, like back to when I was like really starting out and I was starting to skyrocket in like USAP IPF. I mean, I was a kid, right? So my whole it was powerlifting or nothing, right? No responsibilities. It was just powerlifting or nothing. And, at some point, it's like, I think there was a good moment when Larry took the record back, or when Andrew took it, but when someone broke the record, I was like probably sour for a day because I was like, dude, Dan had this for like 5 years.
Yeah, it was a
Like
while.
I throw my neck out there to beat it, and then I only have 2 months. That's not fair, right? And then I was like, dude, what are you doing this for? Like, are you doing this for yourself? Like, or are you doing this for other people's approval? And I'm like, you're doing it for yourself. I achieved my goal. Like, let's continue. Let's keep going.
Yep.
And it was a really good. Not that I needed it, right? But it was a good moment where I was like, hey, dude, no one's more important than anyone else. Let's get back. So we're right back in the gym and hanging out. And so it was really cool because also, when I was growing up, I was never, I was a smaller kid growing up. I didn't like hit my growth spurts and stuff till like almost college. And I think I was 165 pounds coming out of high school. And like I was benching like 315 and stuff, but I was just didn't have a lot of muscle. And so a part of me was always like, man, if I get to the point, because I would see bigger guys, or sometimes they'd be sort of like arrogant or a dick, whatnot. And I was like, man, if I ever get an opportunity to have some sort of platform at all, whether I can give back to guys in my area
Yep.
or people or whoever, I was like, I'm gonna use like that's my goal now. And so it's been really cool because I've been able to be sponsored by companies and work expos, and troponin supplements now that Justin and I co-own, to be able to. We had a booth at the Arnold to be able to talk to guys and just, you know, hang out with people and help them realize like, hey man, like the days of worshiping celebrities and all that stuff, man, it's gone. That's gone, right? And it's like I'm sort of happy about that because it allows people to get motivated to be like, man, I can do that too. And so being able to have like those moments at the Arnold, and at the end of the day, whether you're religious or not, we all came from somewhere or something. So we're all born the same. We're all going to die on the same level, and you don't take nothing with you.
Mhm.
And so, if you keep that in your mind, it's like, hey, while I'm here, I need to be the best I can, and I want, people talk about legacy. I want to leave a legacy, whether it's 1 million people or 5 people or just your family that you took care of, like to leave a legacy that was like, man, he did the right thing. Like he worked his butt off to do the right thing the best he could. We all make mistakes. We all, have moments where life's hard and we're like questioning things, but it's like if you can leave a legacy where it's like, man, this guy really busted his butt and did, the things he valued and was a good person. He made me smile one time. He gave me advice one time when no one else would. And like that's really always been the goal. So, training with the guys at my gym, going back to the question, when I was powerlifting, it was like do or die, smash your head into the thing, smash your back, and that I still get some of that because it's fun, right? We still do that. Like we have 10 plates on a hack squat. Smack me, like that's fun. That's the like guys hanging out, like, mid 30 guys hanging out, just having fun. But I would say definitely the powerlifter never leaves you. So I still have to have some loud music. I still have to have, you know, supportive guy. Like, so there, guy across the gym, and we've created in the gym that you competed at, which has only been around for about a year and a half now, but we've been able to create sort of a family atmosphere where you come in, we're all supporting each other. If you want to be sour or you think you're better than everyone else, like, dude, hit the road, Jack. We don't care about you. Leave. Right. So, but if you're going to come in here and you're going to be like, hey, man, I'll rack, if you need help racking your weights, whatever, I got you, man. No worries. Like, that's what we wanted. And so I would say starting out with bodybuilding, you're at certain gyms like global gyms and no one talks to each other, like that's fine. But I do still like the powerlifting. Hey dude, like let's get after it this set. Let's go to work. And you got guys screaming at you and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think that like now, at least from what I've seen from like when I started, kind of, my first meet was 2006, and I've kind of seen a lot of changes in gyms, in competitions, and even social media.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like more and more people are just kind of like more toward to themselves, or they got their headphones
Yeah.
on, whatever. And I think that's fine. And there's certain things I like. I like there's something to be said about just kind of zoning in and just getting on a machine and not really paying attention to anything else. But to your point, whether it be a hack squat or you're in the monolift, and there's something to be said
Hmm.
about like having some people around you,
Yeah.
or like you're gonna squeeze everything out of that set, and it's like you're
Yeah.
not really sure like if you're gonna come up with it, but you know that you have that support, and like if worst case scenario, if you don't get it, like people are gonna pick you up. And I think that's like a really kind of important thing when it comes to the camaraderie, like a team aspect. And that was kind of one of the things that I really appreciated. The downside of equipped lifting is that it was uncomfortable. It took a lot longer
Took a
than
long time, dude.
training sessions, but I do think that it's really cool to like have someone wrap your knees, have someone get you in the
Mhm.
suit, have someone like, and then like, um, and like to me, like I think that that was something where like I still like kind of, dabble in that, and I'll throw my squat briefs on occasionally. And I'm not sure like when I'll do another meet again. If I do, like I said, I've been kind of focusing on the strict curl right now. It seems like it's a little bit easier on my body. But I think there's something to be said about kind of pushing yourself and then having those people like behind you. And I don't know, something like standing up with like a real heavy squat. It's just it does a lot for you, I think, mentally too. And I think having people like learn to work together, I think that's really important, and that's something where we're trying to instill that like in our family and our kids,
Mhm.
and doing all that. So just kind of follow up on just more like kind of some of the powerlifting stuff, as far as because now you're also kind of helping some other maybe newer lifters at the gym and things like that. So one of the kind of the trends that I've kind of seen, especially kind of like on the tested side, the IPF side. Um, there's a lot of kids that I see that are, and they're doing really well, at least in the short term, um, training very, very specifically, very often, and maybe not doing too much accessories, like only bench.
Yeah, I know you're talking about.
So I'm just kind of curious, like, as far as your thoughts, as far as, you know, if you, because I think that at least in my view, like I think I took a lot from my bodybuilding training. And I think there's like a lot that powerlifters can learn from bodybuilders. So is there anything that if someone was like maybe a newer kid starting out that was maybe on the skinnier side, they're starting out, like what advice would you have for someone that was maybe just getting into powerlifting or just getting into lifting as far as
Well, and John, you know this. Like, powerlifting is not difficult. And
yeah.
what I mean by that, I'm not saying not lifting the weight is difficult. Obviously, 1,000 pounds is extremely difficult to squat. There's only a couple people who can do it. But what I'm saying is, powerlifting is not difficult in the aspect if you take an objective view, right? That means no bias. Okay, the goal is to be as strong as you possibly can. Okay, so we're going to need to fuel, right? We're going to need to sort of figure out our diet, probably eat more consistent, right? That way your weight cuts are more controlled and your strength is more controlled when you do weight. If you have to do weight cuts, things like that, and your training is more consistent, right? If you're sort of eating all over the place, one day 6 cheeseburgers, the next day I eat 3 good meals, you're going to be all over the place with glycogen storages and stuff like that. So definitely make sure you're eating right. Number two, I would say do a meet. Do a meet. See, learn obviously how the proper form, but once you've nailed that, do a meet. See where you're at. Because the only way you improve in powerlifting is by finding a weakness and then working on it. Let's say you have a problem uh, pulling off the floor. Okay, do we need to do deficits, things like that? Let's say you have a problem locking out your bench. Okay, tricep work it is, right? So when you get to a certain point, especially as you get stronger and stronger, stronger, putting size on is going to come to a point where you're like, I'm not really diminishing marginal returns. I'm not really getting anything, and my dots or my Wilks is just going down, right? And then it becomes the basic of what is my weakness? How do we attack it with certain types of training? And that certain types of training comes with accessory work.
Yeah.
We've had, dude, and this is like, because I was profiting in the mid 2000s, and it's like Chico, Smolov. Dude, we had that. Squat 3 times a week, bench 3 times a week, right? And like one day's heavy, one day's all volume, one day's super like low. Like and even conjugate, speed day, like fasting. We've had all that. But so it's nothing new. I guess these kids think it's like new that they just do squat bench dead like every 2 days, and it's like, well, I don't have to work on any accessories. Like, okay, number one, that either works if you're just a freak of nature, right? And let's just say you have a really good lift, boom, you're freaking nature, right? You squat 1,000 pounds, and all you have to do is just squat, right? You don't have to do any single leg movement. You don't have to worry about your hips misaligning. Your glutes fire well. You're just a freak. Like, it happens. There are guys like that, but for the majority, in the 99.99999, there are certain movements you need to do along with those made movements to not only get you stronger but keep you healthy. If your glutes aren't firing, eventually you get under a bar or you deadlift or something. If your glutes aren't firing, your lower back's going to take over more. Then you can hurt your lower back. So there's certain movements. Okay, now I need to do some glute work. As stupid as it sounds, you need to do glute work. As stupid as it sounds, do core work, right? Like, that's going to lock this in so that you don't have as much bend in your squat or things like that. You won't round as much as when you deadlift, and you'll be stronger pushing into that belt, like the diaphragmatic breathing. So I would say, the whole fad of just bench squat dead, because it's easy. You just go to the gym and you hit an RPE 7, and you're always comfortable with your training. You don't have to have spotters. So you never worry about missing a lift. I've seen some of these guys, and then they come work out with me or with a buddy, and then we're like, okay, we're doing this, and we're going to take this like a hard set, and then they get to like 5 or 6 reps, and it starts to becoming a little bit of work, and they want to rack it immediately. Say, no, 3 more, and then they do it, and they're like, oh, one more, and then they rack it, right? And at no point were they in trouble of getting hurt, but it was hard work. And then they look at you and they go, I've never done that before. Like, yeah, a part of me is like, the SBD thing is cool, squat bench dead, everybody. But like, dude, you have to do your accessories and push yourself. The intensity of training has to be there so that, number one, you can get stronger and build tissue and just advance. If you go in and sort of, the SBD sort of gives, well, I knocked out all my volume for the week, so I'm good. I hit my RPEs, so I'm good. That means I'm going to get stronger. No, dude, it sort of makes you a lazy lifter because you don't have to worry about pushing every set. And you know this, I know this, Larry knows this. When you're sitting on the corner of your chair like on a Friday night, and you're thinking about like your girlfriends or something talking to you, and you're zoning out because you're like, I could have squat 800 on Monday. Okay. And like, you're thinking about the walkout, and you're thinking about, like, that's how you improve, like that intensity. Like, you need to have that. So just going through the motions, squatting 6 times a week, cool, but you're never going to reach what you could do, you know.
I think that's a lot of good advice there, and yeah, like I said, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Um, any I guess I know you talked about it. If you want to get into this, do a meet, kind of jump in, see if you like it. I like the going back to, like, actually, like, taking some sets to failure, especially on your accessory work, actually doing accessory work. A lot of good stuff there.
Mhm.
Any other, like, kind of advice that you have if people are maybe on the fence of starting their training journey? Like, what would you tell someone if they were
Well,
like,
I would say, if you're new, number one, have fun, because you're not getting paid when you first start, and most of the time, most of your career, you won't be getting paid. So have fun, enjoy it. If you want to be bench only, cool. If you just want to have big arms, cool. Obviously the goal is always to stay healthy, because we don't want to be doing a sport that doesn't pay us and then croak out at 35 just because. So, have fun, be healthy, and at the end of the day, do what you want, right? If you want to compete single ply, do it. If you got a group of guys that want to do it. Don't worry about what social media says or does. If you want to train a certain way bodybuilding, try it, do it, right? And so my best advice is, have fun, make sure you're doing things properly. Once you learn how to the proper form for things, that means don't max out bench every time you come into the gym, right? Things like that, you'll be good to go. Don't overthink it.
I want to piggyback off of something you said too about, like, you're like, oh, if you want to do single ply, if you want to do this, if you want to. So one of the things that I don't know if you follow CrossFit at all, but one of the things I've noticed, a lot of these CrossFit athletes, I guess, there's been a trend of, like, a lot of people switching over to the high rocks. High rocks a little bit more simpler. It seems like a little bit like lower impact. But anyways, regardless of if it's easier or not, whatever, it seems like it's just like this new popular fad, and like everyone's kind of like been jumping ship from like CrossFit to high rocks.
Huh?
and that's kind of anyway. So like when I dabbled with the raw lifting a little bit, but the equipped lifting was always the thing I loved, and eventually I kind of went back to it, and I was just, so to your point, I think that when you said about the all-time world record, um, why am I doing this? I'm
Hmm.
doing this for me. So I think that's a really important thing. So whether, like I said, I'm kind of been dabbling with the strict curl now, you kind of switched over from, concentrating on powerlifting and bodybuilding.
Hmm.
So whatever like that is for you, whether it's powerlifting or something else, or if it's a certain division of powerlifting, the other thing that we try to do too is like if you want to do a single lift event versus a full meet, like do whatever if it gets you motivated and excited to the gym.
Hmm.
To like your point, I mean, there's been a lot of training sessions where I'm up at like 5:30 in the morning because I'm excited to and
There
that's
you go.
that's what you want. Like you want to like kind of jump
Yes,
up. And so if the training is like too monotonous and it's not fun, and if the goal doesn't really kind of fire you up or kind of challenge you, then you're not going to stick with it. So I think that's some really good advice there. And I'd love to do maybe a part two at some point, maybe talk a little bit more nutrition or some other topics.
for
But
sure.
where can people find you? I know if you want to, anything you want to plug or any
Oh,
like that.
yeah. I mean, my Instagram is probably the best way to contact me. It'd be my name, so John dot C is my middle initial. So John dot C dot Rivas, just the way it's spelled there. So Rivas. And then or Troponin supplements. Justin and I are working constantly. Like I said, we just had the Arnold booth. It was a great time. So we've got new stuff coming up all the time. We got our Generation Iron documentary coming out on Netflix and Amazon Prime. That should be out. We're not done filming yet, but should be done by the end of the year. And yeah, so other than that, feel free to reach out.
Awesome, man. We'll definitely give John a follow as well as Troponin. And like I said, Justin's another guy, powerlifting and bodybuilding, and it's been around a long time. So he's another good guy to follow. Thank you guys so much for listening. If this podcast helped you, please share it. Please give it a 5-star review. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, stay strong, and we'll see you soon.